Marcus Ellison was 39 years old when his wife and her parents sat him down at a dining room table he had never been invited to and slid a document across its polished surface like they were doing him a favor. He drove a 12-year-old Silverado with a cracked dashboard and a heater that ran cool. He wore steel-toed boots to every family dinner because he came straight from the job site, and Diane's father, Gerald, had never once offered to shake his hand first. Her mother, Patricia, had a way of looking at Marcus's hands, the knuckles, the calluses that said everything she never bothered to hide. They called him Diane's handyman, never to his face. But sound travels in big houses. The document was 11 pages, a marital agreement, they said. Not a prenuptial, they'd been married 4 years, but a postnuptial restructuring, which was the clean legal word for the thing Diane's attorney had built over the preceding 6 months without Marcus knowing. It assigned all shared property back to Diane's family trust in the event of separation. It capped Marcus's claim at $40,000, which was roughly what Gerald spent on his last watch. It was signed by Diane. All it needed was Marcus. They had no idea that 48 hours before that dinner, Marcus had received a letter from a probate court in Charlotte, North Carolina. They had no idea who his grandmother really was. They had no idea what was sitting in a trust account under Marcus Ellison's name, the same name Gerald couldn't quite remember when talking to his colleagues. What happened next would cost all three of them everything they thought they owned. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning had started quietly, the way mornings always did when Marcus rose before the house woke around him. He was in the backyard by 5:45, as he was most days that the weather permitted, working on the raised garden beds he'd built from reclaimed cedar planks he'd hauled himself from a demolition site in East Nashville. He'd set the beds level by hand, 3 of them in a row along the south fence, and he was now laying in a second layer of soil amendment. Compost and perlite mixed at the ratio his grandmother had taught him, pressing it in around the base of tomato starts that were just beginning to reach upward with that particular confidence young growing things had before the world taught them better. His grandmother, Cora Ellison, had told him once, sitting on the back step of her house in the summer heat with a glass of water between them, "The ground doesn't care about your plans. You have to know what it needs before it knows what you want." He thought about that line often. He thought about it now as he worked his hands into the dark soil without gloves, the way she had always done. Marcus was a civil engineer by training, structures, drainage systems, load-bearing calculations, and he had spent the last 8 years managing a team of 14 people at a mid-size infrastructure firm out of Nashville. He was not flashy. He drove the Silverado because it carried equipment. He wore the boots because he walked job sites twice a week, minimum, and there was no seniority exemption from standing in the mud when the work required it. His office was clean and organized, and his supervisor had told him 3 months ago, privately, that his name was on a list for a senior director position that paid nearly twice what he was making. He had not told Diane about that conversation. He had not told Diane about the letter from Charlotte, either. The letter had arrived on a Tuesday, plain envelope, probate court return address, and he had read it twice in the parking lot of the Home Depot where he'd stopped for deck screws. He had sat with it in his hands for a long time. Then he had folded it carefully, placed it in the inner breast pocket of his jacket, and driven home. He met Diane 7 years ago at a fundraising dinner for a community land trust he'd been helping pro bono. She was there with a colleague, bright-eyed and laughing at something across the room, and she'd knocked a program booklet off the edge of a table right onto his feet. She apologized 3 times. He told her the boots could handle it. She laughed. It was easy then. She was easy to be around. before the ease became something else, something curated, something she turned on and off by some internal mechanism he couldn't locate. She came outside now, at 6:15, and kissed him on the back of the neck. She smelled different than she had 6 months ago. A new perfume, something drier and more expensive that she had never mentioned buying and he had never asked about. "Mama called," she said. "They want us over Sunday." "All right," Marcus said. She went back inside. He stayed in the dirt a while longer. That night, when he came in from the shower, he found a thin envelope from his own bank on the kitchen counter. It had been opened. He looked at it without picking it up. He looked at the return address and then at the bedroom door, which Diane had already closed. He picked up the envelope. He read the account summary inside. He read it again. He did not sleep much that night, but he kept his breathing even and his face still, and he lay in the dark the way a man lies when he is doing mathematics. He rose before the alarm. He waited until Diane left for work. Then he sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad, a pen, and his laptop, and he began. The bank statement showed a recurring transfer he had not authorized. $1, $400 a month for 11 months. Moved to an account number he did not recognize. He cross-referenced the dates against Diane's work calendar on the shared digital account she had never thought to restrict. The transfers fell consistently on the third business day after her monthly lunch with her mother. $13,200 over 11 months. He pulled up their joint savings account and found 3 larger transfers he also had not authorized, spaced over 2 years, totaling $22,800. The largest one, $9,400, had cleared on a Saturday in March, which was the weekend Marcus had been in Chattanooga on a project review. $36,000 total. Gone in small, careful increments. Patient, deliberate, his hands didn't shake. He was quiet for a long time. He thought about how a drainage system fails, not all at once, never all at once, but in the slow subsidence of one compromised joint after another, each one passing the load to the next until the whole thing gave way. You didn't find it in a dramatic collapse. You found it in the pattern. You looked at the dates, the volumes, the intervals, and the pattern told you everything. He opened a new folder on his desktop. He named it simply Foundation. He spent the next hour compiling every piece of financial documentation he could access. He photographed the opened bank envelope. He screenshotted the transfer history going back 3 years. He downloaded statements. He logged into the shared mortgage account and found Diane's name listed as sole beneficiary on a rider she had added 14 months prior, without his signature. Or what was supposed to be his signature, which bore a resemblance to his handwriting, the way a photocopy resembles a photograph. He looked at it carefully. He moved with the same deliberate calm that had defined all his work in every storm, every difficult meeting, every project that had gone sideways. He was systematic. He was thorough. He took screenshots. He emailed copies to a private account he had held for years, a single character address on a service Diane had never heard him mention. Then he opened his other phone, the sleeker, newer one that stayed in the inner pocket of his jacket, connected to a number only 3 people in the world had, and he called the first of those 3 people. "It's Marcus," he said. "I need to meet." Patricia Wentworth had been a civil litigator for 31 years. Her office on Charlotte Pike smelled like strong coffee and old paper, and the walls were dense with the quiet evidence of her practice. Plaques, diplomas, framed settlements, a photograph of a federal courthouse she had walked out of with 3 different clients on 3 different important days. She spread his documentation across the conference table without speaking for 7 minutes. Then she set her reading glasses on top of the stack and looked at him. "The signature on the mortgage rider is forged," she said. "Not approximately. Definitively, that's what I thought. The transfers are a problem for her, not you. Your account, your money, moved without authorization, will establish the pattern." She tapped the folder. "This postnuptial agreement they're planning, when did you say Sunday? Sunday dinner?" She nodded once. "Sign nothing. Make no indication that you know anything. If they produce the document, read it slowly. Tell them you want to have your own counsel review it, and leave." She looked at him steadily. "Can you do that?" "Yes," Marcus said. She believed him immediately. That was one of the things about Marcus Ellison that everyone who dealt with him in a professional capacity understood quickly. When he said yes, he meant yes in the architectural sense. Load-bearing, measurable, guaranteed. "Tell me about your grandmother," she said. He told her. Patricia sat quietly through all of it. When he finished, she picked up her pen and wrote a number on a notepad and slid it across the table. He looked at the number for a moment. "The trust has been validated," she said. "Fully, as of last Tuesday." Real power. Patricia Wentworth had once told a young associate who was impressed by a client's performance in deposition, operated in quiet rooms. She thought about that now. She thought about the man sitting across from her, and the folded letter in his breast pocket, and the Sunday dinner that was 48 hours away. "Then, we have everything we need," she said. "Let them come." 2 days before Sunday, Marcus drove to Clarksville to see his uncle. Hollis Ellison was 71 years old and had the hands of a man who had spent his working life in construction, knuckled, scarred, permanently stained at the creases with something that soap never entirely reached. He had known Marcus's grandmother as well as anyone living. He had managed a portion of her affairs in her later years, and he had known about the trust for almost as long as the trust had existed. They sat on Hollis's back porch with coffee and the kind of quiet that men who understood each other didn't need to fill. She never wanted it to be a thing people knew about, Hollis said. That's why she kept it to herself all those years. Mama built it slow, starting in the 60s. Land, then property, then shares in other people's ventures when those ventures turned out to be worth something. She wasn't flashy. You know that. Marcus knew that. She always said the family would know when they needed to know. Hollis looked out at the tree line at the edge of his yard. Looks like you needed to know. Marcus told him about the transfers, the forged signature, Patricia's assessment. Hollis was quiet for a time. Then he said, "Your grandmother used to say that a man who knows what he's worth doesn't have to tell people. But he does have to know." He turned and looked at Marcus directly. "Do you know?" "I know," Marcus said. He drove back to Nashville that evening and went home and ate dinner with Diane at the table he had built from black walnut slabs 3 winters ago. She talked about her week. He asked questions. He listened. He passed her the bread without being asked. He washed the dishes while she called her mother. He was performing nothing. He was simply waiting. There was a difference. Patricia's associate, a quiet, methodical young man named Devon, who specialized in forensic accounting, delivered his findings on Saturday morning. The unauthorized transfers had been routed into an account opened in Marcus's name without his knowledge at a credit union in Brentwood. Diane's name was also on the account as a joint holder, added at the time of opening. The account had been used to pay for a series of expenses that Patricia laid out in a column: spa charges, hotel stays in Knoxville and Memphis, a furniture purchase for an address that was not the house Marcus and Diane shared. The furniture had been delivered to an apartment on Harding Road. The lease for that apartment was in Diane's name. It had been signed 14 months ago, the same week Marcus had been in Charlotte for a bridge project inspection. Devon had also found, in the process of auditing the joint accounts, that the mortgage writer carrying the forged signature had been notarized by a notary whose license had been suspended for 2 prior infractions of exactly this kind. Devon had the suspension records, the prior infractions, the timestamp signatures, and the originating transaction logs. He had organized all of it into a binder that was 63 pages long and indexed by date. He had, at Patricia's direction, also cross-referenced the credit union account activity against Diane's phone carrier records, not the calls themselves, but the billing statements for data charges, which showed a pattern of communication on the same device that had been used to initiate each transfer. Devon had found 12 months of meticulous, patient, methodical financial deception. He had laid it out in clean columns that left nothing to interpretation. He was 28 years old, and he apologized to Marcus when he handed him the binder, which Marcus thought said something good about him as a person. $36,000. A fraudulent account. A second apartment. A forged document certified by a compromised notary. Marcus looked at the summary sheet Devon had prepared. He looked at it the way he looked at engineering specs, methodically, from the top, not skipping anything. "Is it enough?" he asked Patricia. "It is more than enough," she said. He nodded and picked up the summary. He folded it into his inside pocket beside the letter from Charlotte. Then he went home, changed into clean clothes, and drove to Gerald and Patricia Hargrove's home for Sunday dinner. Preparation was the work. The reckoning was just the last load in a structure that was already complete. The Hargrove house was the kind of house that announced itself. A large colonial in a good zip code, always freshly painted, lawn service every week. The kind of American living that was supposed to intimidate people who didn't have it. Marcus had been to this table 40 or 50 times. He knew which chair they expected him to take, the one farthest from the head, nearest the kitchen. Positioned so that Gerald Hargrove could speak across the full length of the table without meeting Marcus's eyes directly. He sat in that chair. He folded his hands. He waited. Gerald led them through dinner with the confident ease of a man who had never been surprised at his own table. Diane sat at Marcus's left. Her mother refilled glasses and spoke in the warm, performative way that had always had a slightly stagey quality to it, as though the warmth were an accent she had learned in adulthood. The conversation moved through the usual geography, the neighborhood, Gerald's golf game, Diane's work, until the dishes were cleared and Gerald leaned forward and produced the document. 11 pages. Freshly printed. 2 pens on top. "We thought it was time," Gerald said, "to formalize some things. Protect the family assets. You understand." Diane did not look at Marcus. Her mother smiled in the way that women smile when they are waiting for an outcome they have already decided. Marcus picked up the document. He read the first page. He read the second. He read at the pace of a man who understood every word, which was the pace Gerald had clearly not anticipated. On the third page, Marcus said quietly, "I'll need my attorney to review this before I sign anything." Gerald's smile held. "We'd really like to get this resolved tonight, Marcus. I understand that," Marcus said pleasantly. He set the document down with care. "But I have my own legal counsel, and any document this significant requires her review. I'm sure you understand." He reached into his jacket pocket. He produced 3 documents of his own and set them on the table in a single, unhurried motion. The first was Devon's summary, the unauthorized transfers, the fraudulent joint account, the itemized expenses. The second was a certified copy of the mortgage writer bearing the forged signature, with the notary's suspension record attached. The third was a letter from Patricia Wentworth's firm, addressed to Diane and to Gerald and Patricia Hargrove, outlining the legal remedies available to Marcus in the state of Tennessee and the anticipated claims that would be filed absent a negotiated resolution. Gerald's expression moved from confidence to confusion to something that had no clean name. Diane's hand went flat on the table. "What is this?" she said. It was not a question. "Documentation," Marcus said. He kept his voice even and calm. "Bank records, Devon's forensic audit, and Patricia Wentworth's preliminary letter. Patricia, by the way, sends her regards." "You don't have the resources to," Gerald began. "Gerald," a new voice. Patricia Wentworth herself stood in the doorway of the dining room. She had arrived 8 minutes ago through the side entrance Marcus had left unlocked after asking Diane's mother, 3 Sundays prior, to show him where the breaker box was. She held her briefcase in both hands. "I'd recommend not finishing that sentence." The room was entirely silent. It was Diane's mother, the same woman who had spent 4 years looking at Marcus's calloused hands as though they were evidence of something, who finally spoke. "Diane," she said, very quietly, "what did you do?" Diane said nothing. Marcus stood. He gathered his documents carefully and returned them to his jacket. He buttoned the center button. He looked at the table, the good china, the glasses still holding wine, and then at Diane, who had not looked at him since the papers landed. "I'm not angry," he said. "I want to be clear about that. What I am is informed. There is a significant difference between those two things." He looked at Gerald Hargrove, who was looking at the letter from Patricia's firm as though the words might rearrange themselves into something more manageable. "The trust," Marcus continued, "that was finalized last Tuesday, the one that names me sole beneficiary, carries a value of approximately $500 million. That's what my grandmother built over 60 years, quietly, without announcing it to anyone." He paused for exactly one breath. "You spent 14 months building an exit from a man you thought had $40,000. You had no idea who you were actually sitting across from. I hope this document review has been instructive." He picked up his jacket from the back of his chair. He walked out of the dining room through the front door, which he closed behind him without force. Patricia Wentworth followed, already on the phone. The Hargrove dining room was very quiet. Diane sat at the table with her parents' document in front of her and Marcus's 3 documents beside it. She was looking at a number that kept not changing no matter how many times she read it. $500 million. She had built an exit from a man she thought had 40,000. 14 months later, the morning came in soft over the deck Marcus had built board by board behind the house in East Nashville. A different house now. A broader porch. A garden that had grown through 1 full season and was beginning its second. He was pressing seedlings into the soil when Jade came out with 2 mugs and set one on the rail beside him. She was an architect, quiet and precise, with a way of asking questions that suggested she was genuinely interested in the answers. She had met Marcus at a professional conference 6 months after the divorce was finalized, and she had not, in the 8 months since, performed a single thing for him. She was simply present, the way good structures were present. Reliable, load-bearing, not announced. He thanked her for the coffee. She leaned against the rail and looked at the garden. The divorce had been resolved in 11 weeks, which was considered extremely fast by everyone except Patricia Wentworth, who had filed the forensic audit, the fraudulent account documentation, and the forged notarization simultaneously, which left Diane's legal team with almost nothing to work with. The settlement returned to Marcus every dollar of the unauthorized transfers, dissolved the marital home mortgage arrangement, and awarded him the vehicle and tools. Diane received her personal accounts and her apartment on Harding Road. The apartment, it turned out, she had been paying for with funds that were now legally subject to recovery. That recovery was ongoing. Gerald Hargrove's name had been connected to the notary's prior infractions through Devon's continued audit, which had been provided to the Tennessee Bar Association as a courtesy. Gerald was not an attorney, but his business partner was, and that partner was currently in a process of review that had cost him 2 significant client relationships. Diane worked now at an administrative position for a commercial property management firm in Brentwood. Her mother had not spoken to her publicly since a conversation that, by several accounts, had been audible through the walls of the Hargrove house on a Sunday afternoon 6 weeks after the dining room. Her network, the lunches, the charity boards, the people who had called Marcus boring at parties, had contracted steadily and without drama. Marcus heard all of this through a mutual contact who reported it without embellishment. He registered it. He moved on. His senior director promotion had come through 4 months ago. He had also signed a consulting agreement with a municipal infrastructure firm in Charlotte, which had come as a direct result of a meeting that had been arranged by the trust's estate managers, who were introducing Marcus to the network his grandmother had spent 60 years quietly building. It was a large network. It had been waiting for him. He pressed the last seedling into the soil and sat back on his heels and looked at the row of them. Small, straight, committed to the light that was now finding the yard. His grandmother had told him that the ground didn't care about your plans. You had to know what it needed before it knew what you wanted. He thought he understood that better now than he ever had. He picked up his coffee. The morning settled around him. Jade asked if the tomatoes would be ready by July, and he said he thought so, maybe late June if the summer came in warm. She nodded, and they stood together in the early light without the need to fill it with anything. He had built everything worth keeping. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.